Hey guys, Glenn here, and today we're looking at, in this tutorial, what modes, what scales can we play with what chords and why. Alright, so let's get straight into it. What modes, what scales, what chords. Now I've got the kind of basic three levels of craziness, I guess, in some ways, as to which scale you'd use in for which chord, right? And it's going to make it really easy for, if you're a beginner, go with level 1, just nail that first, and then that's, you know, pretty much, it's going to be 90% probably of your playing from then on. It still probably makes up 90% of my playing. Oh, maybe 80%, 70% now, I don't know. All right, and so level 2 and then level 3. So stay to the end and you can see the different levels, but let's get stuck into the first one. Level 1, right? So different modes and chords that we can play. Now the first thing is that if you see a major chord, you can just play the major scale, right? Simple as that, all right? Now the context does matter, and I'm going to talk about that later on in the video, but right now, just if you see a C major 7, play a C major scale. It's going to work, it's going to sound okay. If you see an F major 7, play an F major scale. It works, it sounds okay, it'll sound pretty good actually, and so you can, obviously you don't just play it straight up, you use those notes as ones you can do. Now, also thinking about guide tones and different things and licks and all that kind of stuff. But basically, if you see a major chord, you can play the major scale that has the same name. If you see the E flat major chord, you can play the E flat major scale. So of course, you need to learn your 12 major scales really, really well. They are going to be the fundamental basics of all of your jazz theory and your jazz playing. All right, so we play lots more than just the major scale, but just learning chords and learning the different modes, they're all based on the scale, the major scale anyway, right? So, all right, let's have a look at the next one. The dominant chord, right, which has a lowered 7th, okay, it has a lowered 7th, or you can think of it as the 5th chord of the key that you're in. If we're talking about a major key, it's going to be the 5th chord. In fact, in the minor key, it's also the 5th chord as well. And that's one of the differences about the dominant chord, the 5th chord of the major scale and the 5th chord of the minor scale is a dominant chord, right? But for example, the 1st chord in a major scale is a major chord, but in a minor scale, it's not, it's a minor. And if you're using, depending on whether you're using the harmonic minor or whatever, it's going to be minor, sharp, a minor chord with a major 7, all right? So, another story, but basically if you see a chord that has, it's the 5th chord of the scale, or in this case, see I've got the B flat, a lowered 7th from the C major, I'm going to be playing the 5th mode of the scale as well, right? Which is a flattened 7th, which is the Mixolydian mode, right? So that's literally the Mixolydian mode. All right, so if I play a D7, I'm going to play the D Mixolydian, right, which is just like D major scale, but with a lowered 7th. Here's D major. Normally play the C sharp, right, in D major, but I'm going to play the C natural. All right, so that's here, just going up in thirds. Now, imagine if I played the C sharp here. Have a listen to this. Right, so here's my D, 1, 3, 5, 7, D major. The C sharp just doesn't quite work there. I mean, you could probably quickly resolve it, but it doesn't generally work. This is the most basic part, right? The most basic thing is, if you're playing a C major chord, play the C major scale. If you're playing a C7 or a C dominant chord, play the C Mixolydian mode. All right, so then, if you're playing a minor chord, there's our major 7, there's our C7 or dominant 7. If you lower the 3rd as well, you've got C, E flat, G, and B flat. So you'd play the Dorian mode, all right? So which has a lowered third and a lowered seventh, right? Now, the Dorian mode is probably the most useful mode when it comes to minor chords, but there are other ones that you can use. But level 1 is major chord, major scale, dominant 7, Mixolydian mode, a minor chord, the Dorian mode, all right? Last one I'm going to show you, and this one you probably don't use anywhere near as much, but it's worth knowing. When you have a flat 7 chord, a minor flat 7 chord, or sometimes also known as a half diminished chord. Now it's really important because it's one of the chords that naturally happens in a major key, right? So it's the 7th chord of a major key. So if I was playing C, the chords of C major, as in the chords of C major, the scale, I would just go up the white notes with that pattern, right? The 7th one has a lowered third, a lowered fifth, and a lowered 7th, okay? So here's B major scale. All right, B major scale has the 5 sharps in it. So if I wanted to play those notes to make my scale, I would have to, there's B major right there. So I'd have to lower the 7th, I'd have to lower the 3rd, and lower the 5th, all right? And so we call that a half diminished 7. Here's the full diminished, where we lower the 7th again, right? That's a full diminished chord. So the half diminished 7 is also known as a minor 7 flat 5, which just is really a description of the chord, right? So here is D minor, the chord. Okay, if I'd play D minor and then lower the 5th, I have the what do you call it? The minor 7 flat 5, or the half diminished 7. All right. So now the scale that works really well with that is the Locrian. All right, and the Locrian is just this. You can either think of it as the 7th mode. I find it much easier to think of it as the 7th mode of the scale, because if you think of it as the different lowered notes that you have to think of, there's a lot to think of. So for example, here, if I'm thinking the 7th mode, that means I'm in the key of E flat, right? So I'm just going to play E flat major, but start on the D. All right, so that gives you the D Locrian, okay? If you were to think of it, and so I'll just go back to that C, here's the chords of C major. If I go back to that, there's our B half diminished, or B7 flattened 5. If I think of that as B major and then have to lower the right notes, I have to lower the 2nd note, the 3rd note, the 4th note, the 5th note, and the 6th note. So you have to alter, so in your mind you would have to alter 5 different, 5, I had 4 going on there. You'd have to alter 5 different notes, right? So for me, it's much easier to think of that as C major scale and just start on the 7th note. C major scale, or white notes, start on the B. Right, so that gives you the B Locrian. So they're the 4 main ones, but I would actually concentrate, if you're quite new to jazz, I would concentrate on the first 3. All right, so that's the Dorian, which goes with the minor chord. The dominant 7 chord, you play the Mixolydian mode, and the major scale, of course, with a major chord. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Let me just show you those scales again. So major. So here's a good way to work out any major scale ever, is to think of it like this: tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. All right, so I'll show you that on C major. Tone is where we're skipping. Semitone is where we go into the very next note, right? It's also known as whole step and half step. Whole step, half step. You can see there's no black note here, okay? Whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Now you can do that with every single scale, any single note, right? So that'll give you that's the formula for a major scale. If I started on A flat, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Okay, now you just need to, at some point in time, you just need to know every single scale, you want to be able to play them two hands. You want to be able to play them in contrary motion, probably is worth doing as well, but at least at the very first, you want to at least be able to play it in your right hand because that's where you're going to be playing. Most of your improvising is probably going to be in your right hand, but I would encourage you to do it in both hands and not wait until you think, oh, you know, it'd be great if I could play with two hands, that solo, right? Don't wait until that moment and then you're like, oh, I can hardly move my left hand, right? So I would encourage you to get started on your left hand as well, so that when you do want to use it, and you may only want to occasionally use it, you've got the ability to do it, right? So there's your major scale. Learn your major scale that goes with the chords, right? The second thing was the Mixolydian mode. So just think of that as a flattened flattened seventh, or the fifth mode. Probably easiest to think of it as the flattened seventh. So if you're thinking G7, think your G major scale, lower the seventh, and then you've got it. If you're playing C7, just think of it as the C scale with a lowered seventh. This is why you got to, this again is why you need to know your major scale really well, right? Because your modes are dependent on that. Okay, so you could go around the cycle of fourths to practice that, for example. You know, so if I start on C, a fourth up from C is F. That's the F Mixolydian, B flat Mixolydian. Now, I probably wouldn't need to practice all of those chords in root position. I could maybe do 1-7, 1-3, 1-7, 1-3. I could do 3-7 and just kind of go down like that. You know, here's C. What are we going? F. B flat. These are all Mixolydians. And go around the entire cycle of fourths. That's a really important thing to have a crack at. Now, the last one was the minor chord with the Dorian mode. All right, so let me just get rid of a little message there saying something about my web page. Not happy. What's your problem? Can we get rid of that? Beautiful. That looks better. All right. So and so the dominant chord Mixolydian and the minor chord Dorian, flat 3, flat 7 is what I think is the easiest to think of it as. You can think of it as the second mode if you want to. So here's C major. The second mode of the second chord of D, right? Of C is D minor. The second mode of C is D Dorian. So you can think of it as like the second mode, or you can think of it as a lowered third. There's D major, lower the third, lower the seventh. And again, I would do it around the cycle of fourths. You know, start with C minor, then go to F minor. And again, you wouldn't have to play all of those in root position as well. You might just do 1-7, 1-3, go around the cycle of fourths like that with your left hand. All right, so, and I don't want to talk too much about the minor 7, flat 5. We talked about that before, right? But it's the seventh mode is the Locrian, okay? Okay, now, here's level 2, okay? Level 2 is where you are going to consider the context of the chords before you think of what mode to use. So level 1 is C a major chord, play the major scale. C a minor chord, play the Dorian mode, all right? Simple as that, right? But level 2 is you're considering the context of the chord compared to, you know, the whereabouts in the piece of music that you're in and what, you know, what key that you're in and all that kind of stuff, right? So here's an example. My Romance, C major 7. So go C major 7, usually D minor 7 after that, then E minor 7, then A7. I played A13 there. D minor 7, G7. All right, let's have a look at that a little bit in context. All right, so the first chord is C. Now, we're in the key of C. So the scale of C major is the most appropriate, I would say, particularly if you want to stay sounding inside, it's the most appropriate scale to use. So if I was improvising that, all right, I would use the notes, the white notes, the C major scale notes, right, to start with. Then we go to a D minor chord. Now, remember I said first case scenario, minor chord, Dorian mode, all right? So that still applies. Now, but you've probably noticed if you're at level kind of 2, if you're considering level 2, is that there's more than one minor chord in a key. Okay, so, and that's the case whether we're talking about a major key or a minor key. So here we have, let's say I'll just stick with C major because it's an easy one to demonstrate and show what's going on, right? So C major 7, D minor 7. If I'm just going up white notes, right? E minor 7. So there's 2 minor chords already. F major 7. So there's 2 major 7 chords. G7, it's a dominant chord. There's only one dominant chord in every scale. A minor 7, that's A minor 7. So here now we have 3 minor 7 chords. There's the half diminished chord, and then we get back to the start, but up an octave, right? So here's the interesting thing. To stay sounding inside, typically you are going to use the mode that corresponds to what chord you're playing. So I know that didn't make sense. If you're playing the 4th chord, for example, in the key of C, the 4th chord is an F major 7. So playing what we call F Lydian mode, is probably the most appropriate one to go, particularly if you wanted to sound sound right in the key that you're in. But if you're playing F major 7 in the key of F, you're probably going to play the B flat, right? You're going to play the F major scale. Okay, so if it's a major chord and you're playing the 4th chord, you probably want to go with the Lydian. If it's the major chord and it's the 1 chord, you probably want to go with the major scale. Now, I said probably because there's many times that we want to do the opposite just to give a little bit more flavour, just to give a little bit more colour. So if I play C major scale on C major, it sounds nice, it sounds right, it's okay. If I play C Lydian, which is the mode that goes with the 4th chord, but even though I'm playing the 1 chord, I'm adding some flavour. Hear that sharp 4 there? And it still worked, right? It still worked. So I can play. Instead of this is back to my romance, right? Instead of then going to the D minor, I can go, then go to the D minor. All right, does that kind of make sense? So you just need to so you're thinking about the context, and then you're thinking about how outside do I want to sound, or what kind of flavors do I want to add in there, all right? So that's something to think about. So level 1 is just major chord, major scale. Level 2 is you see a major chord, so you think, well, I could play the major scale or I could play the Lydian, all right? The next, and then with the minor chord, there's really 3 options just starting from the major scale. All right, so here, the minor chord, here's the Dorian. So in the key of C, you play D, and you're playing a D minor, probably most likely you're going to play the D Dorian, right? But I could play that as if I was playing the 6th chord or the 3rd chord. Okay, so D minor is still is the 3rd chord of B flat major 7. D minor is the 6th chord of F. Okay, so I could think of it as B flat major, or I could think of it as F major. Or I could think of it as C major. See how all three of those work, but they have slightly different colours and flavours, and to your ear, one of them probably works better. Now, but here's the thing: the context really does matter. So when it's you know, you're in one particular key and you played it a certain way, that context really does make a difference. All right. Anyway, that's just something I thought would be useful for you to know there. All right, so in the context of my romance, this is the 1 chord, here's the 2 chord, here's the 3 chord. Okay, so when I get to the 3 chord, I can stay in the just the white notes, right? Or I could go back to, I'm just going to play Dorian, right? Which means I'm actually going to change the key. All right, so. Right, I've changed the key. Now it kind of works really quite nicely to change the key, particularly in this case, because if we look even a bit deeper into the context, we have actually changed the key anyway in this one. So it could be thought of as the 3rd chord, but it's more correct to think of this as the 2nd chord of D major. Why 2nd chord of D major? Because the chord straight after the E minor 7 is an A7, is an A dominant chord. Now remember, there's only one dominant chord in every scale. So as soon as I play that A7, your ear is hearing the key of D something, key of D minor or the key of D major. So when we go 1 chord, 2 chord, this is really 2 chord of D, because here comes the 5. So we're doing a 2, 5, 1. But we go to the minor, we don't go to the major, right? And then now we're doing a 2, 5, 1 in C. So we do C, 1, 2, 2, 5 in the key of D, 2, 5 in the key of C. All right, and so you're thinking about modes that actually might work with that. And so that's the thing I would say. Consider the context. That's level 2. Consider the context and think about what some of the other modes are that you could grab from. And I would, at this stage, I would just stick with the major scale modes. Okay. All right. So here's what the major scale modes are. First one is the C major scale, but it's also known as the Ionian mode. Right. So the Ionian mode. The second mode is known as the Dorian, which we've already talked about. The third mode is known as the Phrygian. All right, it's got a lowered 2, 3, and a lowered 6 and 7 as well. All right, so I think of it as the third mode usually. Just I find that easier than to lower 4 different notes. Okay. The fourth mode is the Lydian mode. And I think of it either as the 4th mode or as a raised 4. And I usually think of it as raised 4th. So there's F major. So I've got to just raise that note, okay, by a semitone. The 5th mode is the Mixolydian, which is a lowered 7th there, which we've already done. The 6th mode, the 8th mode. 6th mode is what's known as the Aeolian, also known as the natural minor. And from the natural minor, we can get to the Mixolydian, the melodic minor and the harmonic minor, which is probably a standard minor that you might have learnt at some point in time. All right, so so that's it. And then of course the Locrian, which goes really well with the minor 7 flat 5. All right. So after that, so you've done that, you've thought about the context, you've decided how outside you want to sound, how colourful you want to sound, and you mix it up. You sometimes do the chord that really it's meant to be, and sometimes you go with the other one because it sounds okay too, and it kind of mixes it up. All right. Then you've got level 3, really. Level 3, and this is really to consider other scales and modes, and there are tons of them. All right, now here's a couple just to get you started. I will do another video at some point in time on these are in more depth, but let me just at least tell you what they are, and then you can find out more about them at some stage. All right, so there's a couple others that are great. Now, chromatic scale obviously is fantastic because that means you can play any note you want, right? Now, that's not going to help you with when do you play the chromatic scale? Well, whenever you feel like it, I suppose. When your ear tells you it's the right scale to play. The whole tone scale is another one that you could think of. All right, whole tone scale. The diminished blues scale, or a half whole scale. So now the whole tone scale, there's only two of them. The half diminished blues, which works really well with like a G7 flat 9. I mean a flat 9 chord or something. All right, or a sharp 9 chord. So it's literally just there's only three of them. All right, so we don't have time to talk about them today. Now the modes also of the melodic minor, and I'll do another video on that, is something that you could go to try and get to level 3, that extra level, okay? So, and they have some cool names, and the names really are quite descriptive if you learn your major modes first, all right? So level 1, just major scale, Dorian mode and Mixolydian mode, maybe Locrian mode, all right, that's level 1. Maybe Locrian mode's level 1B, okay? Level 2 is think about the other modes of the major scale and think about context and when you'd like to use which one. And level 3 is to think about some other scales, all right? So the jazz minor scale, also known as the melodic minor, and think about the different modes that you could get from the harmonic minor scale and the melodic minor scale, as well as the bebop scale and the blues scale, and well, look, there's tons of them. So that's another video, right? So otherwise, I'll be talking for another half an hour or so. Guys, I hope this video was really helpful for you. By the way, I'm giving away 3 face-to-face lessons by next Friday. So if you're interested, all you need to do is subscribe and tell me you've subscribed in the comments. If you're already a subscriber, just tell me you've subscribed in the comments and I'll put you in the draw for that, and hopefully you might win that prize. So that's a face-to-face lesson via Zoom. All right. So, all right, guys, all the best. I'll catch you again real soon for another lesson. All right, bye.